Hi, my name is Carlos Lopez. My research is on the mental side of sports. It's for PE 589, PE and Exercise Science Capstone, Dr. Andrew Allstock. The introduction, the purpose of the statement, the purpose statement, the purpose of the study was to examine what causes athletes to have mental roadblocks. I had a group of athletes answer questionnaires in which were designed to help me understand what causes them fear in sports. The participants were all people that I coached, groups of different teams which I coached, and the ages ranged from 8 to 18 years old. And the biggest gap in literature that I have noticed is that mental toughness and mental research is usually done on athletes at a older age. So mainly you'd actually see it at a collegiate level and higher when trying to understand mental toughness. The difference in this study is that we're going to go at a lot younger age, so from 8 to 18-year-old. And the central research questions, the study were examined were as followed. How do athletes perceive mental roadblocks? What coaching methods are popular in training mental roadblocks? And then what situations in sports cause athletes the most mental roadblocks? So, first, in describing the faith integration, I've always been a really strong believer in God and understanding that He created us all and that He's there for us. I've always loved playing baseball, but it doesn't compare with my love for God. I understand that God comes first, my family comes before that. My family comes before sports. And baseball is just kind of it's a hobby and it's a gift that God has given me to allow to keep playing. And I felt as though a lot of times people place too much importance on winning and losing. And when you understand that God loves you no matter what, your family's going to love you no matter what, and you have certain people around your lives that will give you unconditional love, not based on your success or failures in sports, I think that in reality will help you become mentally tougher and be mentally tougher because you're not so concerned with failure. And the first study which I related to my study was measuring mental toughness in sports, and the purpose of the study was a question the concept of mental toughness based on outside factors and compared to internal factors. So understanding what can cause mental toughness outside and then what personal beliefs in oneself will cause mental toughness. So the study involved 300 football players and they were all 15 to 18 years old. They were at the highest level based on their age group. And the conclusion of this test, the results of the test concluded that those who scored higher on mental toughness were the same athletes who had a higher belief in themselves. So this research was instrumental in the concept of mental roadblocks being limited and even eliminated because the research showed that self-worth is a major factor for roadblocks. So self-worth is something that can be changed over time, something that can be improved, and it could be worsened depending on how your thought process is on yourself. So I felt that this study was important in teaching athletes and having them understand how important they are and how important their beliefs in themselves are in this sport. So the second study involved was based around the proper coaching for mental toughness, and the purpose of the study was to identify how coaching methods correlated with how athletes viewed themselves. So there was 50 male badminton players, and they were all separated into four groups. And these players were chosen different skill levels, and they were given different coaches. And each coach was given a certain instruction in how they would coach. So some coaches were very discipline oriented, while other coaches were a lot more relaxed. And the results of the test were that self confidence among athletes went up with positive coaching feedback. So the coaches who would focus a lot on negative feedback and then mainly just picking out players for what they did wrong and not what they did right caused a lot lower self confidence. So this study is applicable in my study because it enforces the idea that coaching style can depend on the situation as well as the athletes you are dealing with. So certain athletes you might need to understand that they can't handle criticism as well. And I know it's hard as coaches to try to teach players differently, but in reality, no, you can't teach all kids the same. All kids are not going to learn the same way. As my own personal hitting coach, I teach kids multiple different ways based on their thought process. And I think the biggest thing is understanding mental toughness is no different in that. And then the last study which I researched was it involves similarities among the mentally tough. So the first process of this research was to get around 200 of the best cricket players, and they were all nominated by their coaches to participate in the study. And what they had to do was they were given 8 separate scenarios which were considered stressful in cricket, and then in the study was measuring the behavioral inhibitors, which was tested using a computer system designed to have players choose between actions. And the participation of the study completed all the tests in a span of 5 days after the cricket season was completed, and the analysis was a compilation of the data, and it's separated into 2 factors, which are punishment and reward sensitivity. So the results of the test were all separated among the different categories. First, on the mental toughness, the description of which traits went best with another. Having a high reward trait and low punishment had an average mental toughness rating, while like a high reward, a high punishment had a lower rating. And the highest rating was a high punishment with a low reward. The results of the threat detection also confirmed that previous results, because threat detection was at its highest when punishment was also at its highest. So I found that this source was pertinent to the study because it identifies that thought process is necessary for success. So the way a person thinks prior to achieving a goal is important because you want them to understand multiple ways that mental toughness can take place. It's not just one set way of thinking. So this will allow me to try to coach athletes in a different way and see how they reacted to it. So I would coach differently throughout this 12-week is what I did. And then I would have them answer after certain weeks in which I would coach differently to see how they reacted. So the methodology, the method that I'm going to use involves qualitative research because as seen in other research studies, quantitative research can be very cut and dry, while qualitative approaches could help tease our additional factors. So the research design will be a combination of participant observation, the survey, the questionnaires, and the interviews. So as their coach, it's really easy for me to observe them consistently. And then after each practices, I had designated times in which my participants would answer survey questions and I would give them one-on-one interviews. And the mental toughness sport interview guide, so the MTS is what I call it, interview guide. The purpose of the guide was to develop a series of questions which can be used to help understand and train mental toughness. So the first guide was 7 fill-in questions for demographics, 6 open-ended questions, and 10 Likert scale questions. And then the second MTS guide is 6 open-ended questions and 8 Likert scale questions. And then the final MTS guide was 6 open-ended and 10 Likert scale questions. So the research of the project was done over 12 weeks, which was during our season. And what I would do is I would give them interviews after week 1, 6, and 12. And the data collection process took about an average of 15 minutes to complete each survey. And most participants were able to fill out the Likert scale questions quickly, but it would take a little longer sometimes on open-ended questions. And sometimes they would ask me questions trying to understand exactly what the question was trying to get out of them. So I would try not to help them as much and see what kind of answers they would go for. And if they were going to give a short answer, I would try to explain it to them so they would give me a longer, a more descriptive answer. So there was 3 major factors when I found out in the results that I felt like were the most important topics in research. And the first one, which I thought was the most important, was that parents are key. So the first thing that I discussed was how important a parent's role can be in creating or limiting mental roadblocks. Many of the kids that were very successful and I found to have less mental roadblocks were the kids whose parents did not place a large importance on winning. And the kids felt as though nothing would change at home, being good or bad, on the baseball field. And the kids who had most mental roadblocks was the complete opposite, where they felt that things changed at home if they were unsuccessful, or their parents were angry at them if they were unsuccessful while playing baseball. And that, in turn, what ended up happening was those kids had much more stress before they'd even play the game. So before they're even stepping on the field, they're thinking about failure because they're afraid of failing. And this, in turn, made them worse players. So that was a big factor in a lot of the interview questions and answers which I received from my participants, was how important their parents felt in being successful was. And the second theme was coaching priorities. So what I tried to do is correlate how athletes viewed baseball with how their coaches viewed games. And the major theme that I noticed was that coaches either felt that winning is everything or winning is not important. And the kids who had coaches who winning was everything or when kids felt that their coach was all about relaxing and understanding and getting better, those kids were better. Those kids were a lot more relaxed. They weren't as focused on winning, but they were just doing the process of what they did throughout the week, and they were more successful. And even when I was coaching my players, there was certain weeks. Most weeks I tried to place no importance on winning, and then one week out of the 12 weeks, I said winning is everything. All I care about is us winning. We're gonna see what happens. We're gonna win. We're gonna win. We're gonna win. And in turn, I mean, we played worse. We were a lot more stressed. You can see everyone was really worried about what everyone else was doing and not worried about themselves. And the last result theme was control the controllable. It's a description of the thought process in which many roadblocks are being created through the lack of results. And the problem in baseball is that results are not always going to happen. The best hitter in the world will fail 7 out of 10 times. And in baseball, a lot of times you can do everything correctly as a hitter, hit the ball right, do everything correctly, hit a line drive, and it gets caught by the opposition. So in reality, you did nothing wrong at all, yet your success was not there. And the biggest thing is understanding that kids need to be congratulated and praised for being successful even when they're not actually being successful. And I think that's one of the biggest things in baseball that you don't see in very many other sports. So the discussion in the question, how do athletes perceive mental roadblocks? It was answered through the research questions, and throughout the questions of my MTS guides, there were answers describing what some would consider roadblocks. And the major similarities and the major theme throughout all the answers of the participants was that roadblocks were directly correlated with failure. So if any factor that had led them to fail, they considered that a roadblock. So if it gets directly associated with failure, it's clear that athletes view mental roadblocks as anything causes them failure. And in analyzing the results for the first research question, it was clear that the majority of the athletes perceive mental roadblocks to be an attribute of failure. So there was a difference between the athletes who understood that failure was part of baseball while others viewed failure as being negative. So the results go hand in hand with research seen in creating a consistent hitter, which results show that baseball players who understood that failure was part of the game, they were a lot more relaxed and consistent throughout the year. This is similar to the results in this research because the participants who were less stressed in the game situation had minimal roadblock situations. So implications and future research. This research was developed to create an understanding of players and like the obstacles that take place from there throughout thought process. The project studied a field which is not highly discussed. The lack of consistent knowledge meant that people who would be affected by the research was limited. The biggest people that I felt were going to help from this study were coaches, athletes, and parents. And I figured that the biggest change that needs to be done for future research is understanding a little more family dynamics. So as we can see, parents are key and parents are so important in causing or limiting athletes' mental roadblocks. I think what I would like to do for my next research, if I would continue in this field, is I would do a lot more in-home questions or family questions and understanding what kind of background they had and how these kids kind of were raised to understand what sports were. You know, I kind of want to understand, like, if parents have always told their kid that sports are about winning and being the best, or if parents would discuss sports as, oh, you know, being with your friends, hanging out, having a good time, and see how that would affect them differently in their thought process. So I think that's the biggest change that I would want to do for my next research, and that's it. Thank you very much.